Okay, so here is the vessel now decorated and complete. It's now time to fire our pottery. We'll be firing in reduction, and reduction firings are very tricky and very complex. I'll be joining with Kiowa Sage, and we'll take you step by step through that entire process right now in turning raw clay into a ceramic.
So reduction firing generally entails a lack of oxygen flow in the firing environment when you're firing your pots, and it's usually more advantageous for painted wares, things like this, using organic paints and or mineral paints on your pottery, and it kind of helps it show up more by leaving a carbon stain.
So hopefully we'll get the right results and turn these black on gray.
So what we're doing right now is setting up our primary fire. So the point of the primary fire is to build a good kiln environment, to build a nice hot bed of coals for these pots to then sit on top of. Also to warm these pots up, most importantly. So clay is hygroscopic, which means that it retains moisture from its environment. So even if your pot is dry and has been drying for even 2 months, the clay still has residual moisture content in it. So this is a really crucial step in the process to ensure that your pots don't explode or crack due to thermal stress and moisture blowouts during the actual firing. So you just want to take this step really slowly. That's really the key. Slow and steady wins the race for this. So we're just, letting this burn down to coals, and then we'll get on to the next step. I wanted to mention some things about this stage. So the preliminary fire is almost burned down. We have a few pretty large pieces of wood that are still burning down to coals, but you notice that we're making some really nice thick sturdy coals here. When you make your preliminary fire, you don't want it to be all ashy. You really want that nice hot bed of heat, because that's really going to help you with the firing process, because any heat that you're using in this initial process, it's only adding to the heat that's going to be used in the firing process. So this is a really important stage, and this is just sort of the waiting game. You're letting it sit and you're letting it burn down completely. I think haste creates waste, so just take it really slow. So something I'd like to add on these pots here. So I have this test bowl that I made. This is a new clay that I actually dug probably 20 miles from here. It's out in the same area. It's a new clay. I was curious to see how it worked. These two bowls and this one jar, these have already been fired, but I would consider them misfires. I fired these probably 2 years ago and didn't really get ideal results. So I'm taking them back today. You can actually refire your misfires and burn off all this extra carbon. It might not look like it from here, but there is a decent amount of paint on these inside the bowls and even inside this jar that I want to have show up again. So even if you make a mistake in the firing, you can refire already fired pots and bring out the colors again and burn off all that excess carbon from smudging. So right now we're putting in kiln furniture. Kiln furniture is our stones, primarily or ideally volcanic rocks, to set your pots upside down on top of, and this gives good oxygen flow underneath and prevents your pots from smudging and allows even heating. And as far as kiln furniture type, volcanic stones are the best. Considering that volcanic rocks at one point were superheated lava, these stones tend to generally heat up very, very hot, but they don't explode or crack. And so right now it's just good just to let these sit in here, so just in case if there were any residual moisture, if you can get all the popping out of the way, so the popping won't happen on your pottery and break it, spoil it. So we have all of our kiln furniture laid down, and we put the pots on top of the kiln furniture. And so you notice that these pots are propped up about like 4 inches. That's about ideal. There's plenty of airflow underneath. They're not going to smudge from a lack of oxygen in the kiln. And right now we're just gonna let this heat up. We're gonna let this superheat. The best telltale sign that your pots are ready for the actual firing is if you just take some saliva or a drop of water and put them right at the top of your upside down jars and bowls. If it sizzles off the jar, then you're ready to go. That means that you've reached a sufficient temperature where most of the residual moisture in the clay has already evaporated out.
Yeah, maybe
Why don't we?
a little bit closer in. Maybe lay it flat.
I think this is solid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Closer. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. And then we'll do this last one.
Uh-huh.
Right there. Okay.
All right. So we're laying these beamers across, and we're not letting any of the wood touch the pots, and this is going to really help us with as little smudging as possible on our pottery, and also ensure that the kiln has an even amount of oxygen flow with not a whole lot of smudging.
And the one thing that we're doing when we lay these across and stack the wood is we're not going to stack it in the middle. We want to stack it along the edges.
This is getting very hot. Definitely. There's no doubt in my mind. letting this last bit of flame die down, probably for another 8 minutes. And then once all flame is gone and we just have a nice hot bed of coals covering this, that's when you smother the kiln pretty rapidly. And we're going to leave that overnight and then come back tomorrow morning and check out our results. Alright, so that concludes the reduction firing. We've buried the kiln, we've suffocated basically all the oxygen out of the kiln, and now the pots are going to be resting in here overnight. And tomorrow morning we're going to come back and see what the results were of this firing. And again, the point of doing this is to not oxidize your pots. So there's a point, there's a period in between where your pots will oxidize because there's too much oxygen getting into your kiln. But you have all those coals that were covering the pots earlier. That really sealed those pots in. But if we would have let them go much longer, the pots could have very well oxidized and burned off all the paint. So this is sealing the pots in, reducing them to a nice cream gray color, and so the paint actually probably already burned off, but what we're left with is a carbon stain, and that is how you get the black on gray style of